In 1976, two outsiders set out to build bikes so good they might finally topple European giants, armed with nothing but a red barn, steel tubing, and a 5-person payroll. Trek's official history celebrates global innovation and racing glory, but the real story is far messier. It is a story of staggering risks, an obsession with American craftsmanship, and a growth so explosive it forced a tiny workshop into a $2 million powerhouse in just 3 years. How did Trek transform from a humble barn to a global force, and what secrets still lie beneath the surface? Let's trace the path from Waterloo's back roads to the world stage. A red barn stands on the edge of Waterloo, Wisconsin, its boards weathered by Midwest winters. In early 1976, Richard Dick Burke and Bevil Hogg unlocked its doors and rolled in crates of steel tubing, a handful of workbenches, and an ambition to prove American hands could rival the finest European builders. The address was not famous, just a rural stretch outside town, but inside, something new was taking shape. 5 workers, including Burke and Hogg, set about heating brass and silver with small torches, brazing together frame after frame by hand. The air filled with the sharp scent of flux and the steady tap of files against steel lugs. Each frame was checked, measured, and signed off with a pride that came from knowing every weld would carry the Trek name. The first year's output, 904 frames, was modest by industry standards, but each one sold for under $200, aimed at riders who wanted something better than the mass-produced imports flooding the market. Penn Cycle in Minnesota became the first to take a chance on these barn-built bikes, stacking Trek frames alongside the established names from Italy and Japan. For the founders, the barn was not just a workshop. It was a statement, American quality, built from scratch, with no shortcuts. Dick Burke often recalled those early days as a test of endurance and belief. The barn's cramped quarters forced the team to improvise, hanging finished frames from rafters and scribbling production tallies on the back of shipping crates. Tools were shared, mistakes were fixed on the spot, and every payday meant counting just enough cash to keep the lights on for another week. Yet, as word spread about the durability and ride of these new bikes, orders trickled in faster than the barn could handle. The original 5 watched as their hand-brazed frames rolled out the door and onto back roads and city streets, each one a quiet challenge to the notion that the best bikes had to come from across the ocean. Decades later, owners still bring those early steel Treks to local shops for tune-ups. The original paint chipped, but the frames as solid as the day they left Waterloo. The barn may have been small, but it gave Trek its backbone, a belief in craft, persistence, and the idea that a great bike can start with nothing more than a dream, a torch, and a barn at the edge of town. By 1980, the barn's walls could no longer contain Trek's ambition. Construction began on a new 26,000 square foot factory just down the road in Waterloo, a leap from the cramped makeshift quarters where the company's first frames had taken shape. The new plant was not just bigger, it was built for scale, with assembly lines, dedicated welding stations, and enough space to hold finished bikes by the hundreds. The hum of machinery replaced the quiet clatter of hand tools, and the smell of fresh paint and cutting oil filled the air. Orders kept coming, faster than ever. Dealers from across the Midwest placed calls for more frames, then complete bikes, and soon Trek's monthly shipments outpaced what the barn had produced in a year. Revenue soared, reaching $2 million by 1979, a figure that would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier. For the first time, Trek could afford to invest in new equipment, hire more staff, and experiment with materials beyond traditional steel. Shop foremen remember those early days in the factory as a blur of overtime shifts and problem solving. There were growing pains, bottlenecks at the paint booth, supply shortages, and the constant pressure to deliver on promises to dealers who were betting on an American-made alternative to European imports. But the sense of possibility was everywhere. Each successful shipment meant more bikes on the road, more riders discovering the feel of a Trek beneath them. The owners themselves were often seen riding the latest models before dawn, testing geometry tweaks on county roads or double-checking welds in the glare of fluorescent lights. The move from barn to factory did not erase the old values, it amplified them. Every frame still bore the marks of careful inspection, and every employee knew the stakes. Trek was no longer a passion project. It was a bona fide manufacturer with its reputation and future riding on every bike that left the line. By the late 1980s, Trek's engineers were looking for the next leap beyond steel and aluminum. Carbon fiber had become the new frontier in cycling, lighter, stiffer, and promising a ride quality that could outpace anything on the road. But the company's first major attempt to harness this material would become a lesson in risk and humility. The Trek 5000, released in 1989, was intended as a showpiece, a molded monocoque frame built not in Waterloo, but outsourced to a specialist, Brent Trimble. On paper, the 5000 should have been a breakthrough. It was advertised at just 3.3 pounds. Lighter than anything Trek had built before. Yet, as the first production models rolled out, problems surfaced almost immediately. The frames were heavier than promised, and riders reported worrying fragility. Some frames cracked under normal use, and others failed basic durability tests in the lab. Dealers returned bikes, and engineers pored over fractured carbon tubes, searching for answers. The dream of a carbon revolution was unraveling, one warranty claim at a time. By the end of the year, the 5000 was quietly withdrawn from the market. The experience stung. Trek's reputation for reliability was suddenly at risk, and the promise of carbon fiber felt more like a warning than an opportunity. Inside the factory, the setback forced a reckoning. The company had relied on outside expertise, but now it was clear, if Trek wanted to lead in composites, it would have to build that knowledge itself. Engineers began sketching out a new plan, one that would bring carbon development in-house, demand stricter quality control, and set higher standards for strength and weight. The failure of the 5000 didn't end Trek's carbon ambitions. Instead, it set the stage for a new approach, one that would eventually define the company's next era. For now, though, every broken frame was a reminder. Innovation comes with risk, and shortcuts have a cost. In the early 1990s, Trek's engineering team gathered around a set of aerospace manuals, searching for answers in the fine print of aviation technology. The lesson was simple: if carbon fiber could hold up jet wings, it could transform a bicycle frame if it was compacted just right. Bob Reed, Trek's director of technology, returned from an aerospace trade show in Salt Lake City with a new idea to eliminate the tiny voids that weakened early carbon bikes. The team began experimenting with a process called optimum compaction, low void, known as OCLV. Instead of relying on outside suppliers, Trek invested in its own advanced composites lab. Engineers like Jim Colagrove adapted techniques used in aircraft manufacturing, pressing layers of carbon under precisely measured heat and pressure. The result was a frame with almost no air pockets, lighter and stronger than anything Trek had built before. In 1992, the first OCLV bikes appeared, the 5500 and 5200 models. The 5500 weighed just 2.44 pounds for a road frame, the lightest production frame in the world at the time. Riders and industry critics took notice. The new process was not just about weight, it brought a level of consistency and durability that had eluded earlier carbon designs. Trek's engineers kept notebooks filled with layup patterns and compaction data, treating every frame like a small piece of aerospace hardware. The launch of the 5500 put Trek at the forefront of carbon innovation, and the technology soon migrated to mountain bikes with the 9800 model, offering the same strength to weight advantages off-road. OCLV changed how bikes were built and how they could perform. For Trek, it meant more than a technical breakthrough. It was a declaration that the company was not just following trends, but setting new standards. The success of these early OCLV frames opened the door to professional sponsorships, as racing teams sought the lightest, fastest machines available. Behind each frame was a story of trial, error, and a willingness to borrow from the skies to win on the road. Phone lines jammed with dealer calls. Fax machines spit out orders around the clock. In the wake of Trek's sponsorship of the United States Postal Service team, demand for OCLV carbon bikes exploded beyond anything the company had seen. Warehouses filled with backlogged frames, and employees worked late into the night to keep up. Marketing executive Roger Gearhart remembers the scramble. "We were getting calls from shops we had never heard of, begging for just one frame. It was like someone flipped a switch." The surge was not just about volume, it was about pressure to deliver innovation on a global stage. Trek's engineers hustled to refine every detail, pushing prototypes into wind tunnels to shave off precious seconds. In one test, a redesigned aerotube profile cut drag enough to save several seconds in a 40-kilometer time trial, a margin that could mean a yellow jersey or just another finish. The data did not stay locked in the lab. It filtered straight into the next production run, with assembly lines pivoting to meet the new specs almost overnight. Dealers reported wait lists months long. Some customers put down deposits sight unseen, trusting that the same technology raced in France would soon roll onto their local roads. The pressure to scale fast brought its own risks. Every missed shipment, every delayed frame threatened to erode the trust Trek had built since the barn days. But the company doubled down, launching Project One in 2001, a custom program that let buyers design bikes to their exact specs, blending racing pedigree with personal choice. The surge tested every system, but it also proved how far Trek had come from its barn-built beginnings. On October 22, 2012, the United States Anti-Doping Agency released its final report, erasing 7 Tour de France titles from Lance Armstrong's record and imposing a lifetime ban from professional cycling. The official findings laid out years of systematic doping, implicating not just Armstrong but an entire era of the sport. Trek, whose bikes had carried Armstrong to each of those victories, issued a statement the same day. Effective immediately, the company would sever all ties with the former champion. The press release was brief, expressing disappointment and a commitment to fair competition. But the impact ran deeper. For over a decade, Armstrong's wins had fueled Trek's global profile, their bikes synonymous with triumph on cycling's biggest stage. Now, every photo, every highlight reel was suddenly tainted by scandal. Industry analysts weighed in, noting the reputational blow not just to Armstrong but to every sponsor that had shared in his success. One independent observer remarked that when the wins disappear, the brand has to reckon with what is left. Inside Trek's headquarters, the mood was somber. Employees removed posters and memorabilia from offices and showrooms. Dealers fielded questions from loyal customers, some angry, some bewildered. The company's leadership faced a hard reality. The achievements that had once elevated Trek were now a source of scrutiny. In the months that followed, Trek doubled down on its commitment to clean sport and shifted its public focus away from celebrity endorsements. The Armstrong fallout forced a period of reflection, one that would shape the company's next chapter. Electric bikes first appeared in Trek's catalog as a quiet experiment. A few models tucked between mountain and road, meant for riders who wanted a little extra push. But by the late 2010s, the Allant Plus line changed the conversation. Engineers worked with Bosch to refine battery integration, aiming for clean lines and natural handling rather than bulky, obvious motors. The result was a commuter bike that looked and felt like a Trek, only faster. Range and reliability mattered as much as speed, and the Allant Plus could cover over 60 miles on a single charge, turning heads in cities from Madison to Munich. For Trek's product managers, electric bikes weren't just about performance. They were a way to get more people on bikes. Older riders, new commuters, anyone who saw steep hills as a barrier. The company invested in research to understand how electric bikes change daily routines, then used that data to guide design tweaks. Fenders, racks, and integrated lights became standard, blurring the line between a bike and a true vehicle for urban life. Sustainability moved from marketing to manufacturing. Carbon fiber scraps from Trek's Waterloo plant, once destined for the landfill, now get shipped to a partner facility in South Carolina where they are repurposed for new products. In Wisconsin's Kettle Moraine State Forest, Trek's advocacy helped fund and build dozens of miles of new trails, working with local volunteers to ensure access for future generations. The company's stewardship now extends beyond bikes, shaping how people move and how landscapes are preserved. For the team in Waterloo, the next innovation isn't just lighter or faster, it's smarter, cleaner, and built to last. Trek's headquarters still sits on the edge of Waterloo, Wisconsin, not far from that first red barn. Unlike most companies of its size, Trek remains privately held, a rarity in an industry where public offerings and outside investors are the norm. This private stewardship has shaped how the company moves, allowing decisions that favor long-term innovation over short-term gains. Employees have a stake in the outcome, with ownership tied directly to the company's future. The result is a sense of continuity that's hard to find elsewhere in the bike world. Signature models now define Trek's identity. The Domain, built for endurance, uses ISO speed decouplers to smooth out rough roads, turning long rides into something almost effortless. The Madone, with its camtail virtual foil tube shapes, slices through the air, a product of wind tunnel sessions and pro peloton demands. Amanda stands for pure lightness, a bike stripped of anything unnecessary, favored by climbers chasing every ounce. For riders who leave the pavement behind, the Fuel X delivers full suspension tuned for versatility, handling rocky trails and forest descents with the same confidence. The Marlin, Trek's entry-level cross-country mountain bike, brings durability and trail-ready geometry to riders just starting out or looking for a reliable companion on any terrain. These flagship lines are more than catalog entries. They are the outcome of decades spent refining what a bicycle can be. Each model carries a piece of Trek's history, the drive to innovate, the insistence on quality, and a belief that a great bike is always within reach, whether it's destined for a grand tour or a morning commute. Even as the company scales globally, the core remains private, rooted in Waterloo, and committed to building bikes that reflect the ambitions of everyone who rides them. Trek's story isn't just about bikes, it's about who shapes the future of movement. In an industry dominated by global giants and shifting trends, Trek remains privately owned in Wisconsin, still setting standards for innovation and sustainability. As electric bikes and climate priorities transform mobility, Trek's next breakthrough could redefine how we ride and where we go from here. What do you think the future holds? Join the conversation below.